Hello family, how you doing? It's your brother Vladimir. Peace to you, peace to your home, peace to your family, peace to your community, peace to your ancestry, peace to my community, peace to my ancestry, and peace to the nation that you, I, and they are building. Peace also to the God who boards it, great spirit above, mother below. This is Mtima Radi. So I want to talk with you about COVID-19 as a natural response to mankind, humankind, man's, and unfortunately even humans' destructive capacity on this planet. Now, I have to first start off by saying we have to understand Earth, what we call Earth, has a soul. This is a living being. This planet that we call a planet is a living being. The ancient Egyptians said this. The indigenous people all throughout the world said this. The only people that tended to think that this was not a living being were from Europe. I'm not really quite sure how the Chinese viewed it. I've never really looked at the Asians. But this planet has a soul. And the movie Avatar, which was supposed to have a sequel coming out this year, I don't know if it still will. They had a scene where the scientists discovered this. And I am not quite sure if that was a signal to the rest of the world that there is scientific belief that's starting to rise up, which suggests that even scientists are starting to say, you know, this planet responds to us. Or if it was a nod to the many mythologies that exist throughout the world, which suggest the planet does have a soul and is responsive to us. But it does have a soul, and we must recognize that. Last year, we saw the mind-numbing fires that ravaged through Australia and the Amazon. It is still part of Jair Bolsonaro's, I don't know if you know who he is, but he's the very crazy Eurocentric, doesn't look like the population of Brazil at all. He looks very white, president of Brazil. He has encouraged the continued burning up of the Amazon rainforest. But last year we saw the devastating wildfires in Australia. At the time, family, and I know this might surprise you a bit, but I was experiencing a sickness that prevented me from really talking about that, and I wanted to go all in on that because I understood that part of the reason why the fires were ravaging were, one, because there's an indigenous group down there that still is there. They've been displaced from their land, actually, and the Australian government has not wanted to honor any treaties that they have with that group, and they've wanted to keep them off of their traditional tribal lands. I understood that this fire was not only about that, but it was also Mother Earth's response to the fact that she couldn't contact her children. Remember, all of these groups, they had these ceremonies that they would perform to communicate with the mother. You know, the European would see these native tribes doing these dances where they would make signs in the air and they would stomp their feet and they would hit their arms and hands on the ground and they would say, these people are primitive. What are they doing? They're acting stupid. No. They were communicating with the mother, and they were communicating with the cosmos as well as the ancestors. And right now, the Great Mother is trying to contact her children to figure out what's going on, to tell them, you need to stop abusing me. I'm hurting here. And she can't get a hold of her children. And she's responding to that. So that fire, which should have been easily put out, ravaged. Horribly so. All that smoke went into the air. Remember, Native Americans used to send smoke signals to one another to communicate. But they would also do that with the ancestors and with the cosmos and with nature. Mother Nature does the same thing. Just because the European hasn't cracked the code doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Well, it's quite amazing that while those fires were ravaging Australia, COVID-19 came on the scene. Now, I know many of you are predisposed to think that this is a government conspiracy, this is the, Gates acting up and stuff like that, and fine, I'm not here to debate that. What I am here to tell you is this. Years ago, Asa Hilliard gave a talk in front of the group. I always want to say it's ASCAP, but it's not, because ASCAP is the Musical Association. I think it's called ASCAG, which was a group that was founded to promote black intelligence, basically. They were doing some really powerful work. Well, he gave a talk about the rising of, let me back up. He gave a talk where he was imploring black people, particularly black professional people, to take seriously the organization of power and resources within the white community when they were aimed at black folks, which may be the best way to say that. He begged professional black people to start paying attention to how white people were organizing themselves, and how they were forming these things called foundations to put up works that would challenge the hard, truthful and studious works that black academics were doing to unveil the truth about our culture and our history to our people. White folks were literally funding people, whether black, white, yellow, or brown, to write books challenging that work with completely false information and misconceptions. And Asa Hilliard talked about this. This was back, I believe, in the late 90s when this was recorded. And he begged them to start taking this threat seriously, and even proposed that they start mapping where these structures were and how they were interconnected, the people who were interconnected within them, and what have you. I don't know whatever came of that. But I do know, I don't know if it was about the same time, it might have been a little bit earlier than that, there was a defection from the neoconservative camp to what was then the neoliberal camp, which was the Clinton camp. This was, again, back in the 90s. This man named David Brock had been a neoconservative for years, and then he had switched and become a neoliberal and joined the Clinton camp. And he still is part of the Clinton camp. Well, he wrote 2 books to kind of solidify his allegiance to the Clintons. The first one was called Blinded by the Right. The second book was called The Republican Noise Machine. The second book is the most important book because it does exactly, to an extent, very large extent, it does exactly what Asa Hilliard wanted done. It tracks and traces the people in the organizations while giving a historical overview of those people and those organizations. Now, give me 1 second, family. All right, I'm back. The reason why I brought that up is because a lot of black folks came across some very interesting information back in March and April. A friend of mine actually sent me one of these videos, and I was stupid. I should have grabbed it immediately and kept it so I could use it as an example for you guys. There were people putting out videos saying, oh yeah, COVID-19 is nothing but 5G, or COVID-19 isn't as serious as anything. It's like getting the flu. This is a plandemic. This is a hoax to take down the Trump administration. This is, Bill Gates and George Soros getting together to crash the economy, to do this and to do that, and to do this and to do that. Here's the thing, family. One, I called bogus when I first saw it because the communities that were going to be the most impacted, particularly in the state that I live, New York, in New York City, when it was ravaging through New York City, was going to be a lot of black and brown neighborhoods because the essential workers in those areas were mostly black and brown. So I called bogus to me immediately because that just didn't make sense. Secondly, what has come out since then is that there appears to be a lot of conservative funding. And when I say appears to be, they've actually uncovered information that says that there's a lot of conservative and corporate funding that is going towards not only producing these things, but propagating it and pushing it towards you. These people are literally threatening your life by putting these things out, and they don't care. It's all about money to them. They want the economy open. The hell if, 5 million people have to die on the way to opening the economy. It's just a bunch of poor people anyway. We have to mature politically, ladies and gentlemen. It's fine if you have a suspicion of government and corporations, which most of you have more suspicions of the government than the corporation, and that's just not smart. That's just not smart because as a person who, I'm talking about here, as a person who started off learning about economics and learning about the history of business, capitalism, and things like that, guys, your big corporations are slimy. And I know most of you want to be like, well, so is it the government. The powerful influence that corporations have on the government has transformed the government. The book, So Damn Much Money, get that book, because that shows you the recent history of how money really took over Washington. The book, We the Corporations, which shows you the 150, 200 year struggle, less than 200 year struggle, maybe. Yeah, I think it's about 200 years. 200 year struggle towards corporate personhood. The book that I just finished, I don't have a hard copy of it yet, but I just finished listening to it. It's a powerful book called Goliath. 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 By Matt, Matt, Stoller, Stoller. that's going to blow your mind. That takes you through the antitrust fight against democracy from the 1920s to the modern day. You definitely want to get that book. We don't understand corporations as much as we should. Also get the book When Corporations Ruled the World. That's a good book. As always, get Perelman's, Perelman, get Perelman's The Invention of Capitalism. I'm looking. I want to make sure I don't miss anything here, guys. Right now, that's it. But I understand that we don't have a trust of, government, but at the same time, there's one of the major issues, and it's very clear to me as I've been studying. Oh, I forgot one book, but as I've been studying, recent corporate and business and economic history, what is very clear to me is black people, we've been so focused on racism, which we need to be. I get that. I'm not saying don't be, but get beyond that for a minute and listen. That we haven't been paying attention to white people. And what I mean by that is we are so worried about conquering racism so we can fit into the society, so we can be assimilated into the society, that we ain't learned what Martin Luther King learned, which was you need to be concerned about the society that you're integrating into, that you're trying to assimilate into. And the question is, do you want to integrate into that? At the same time, when civil rights was happening, when the civil rights movement was happening, there was a parallel movement happening. And if black people had been paying attention, then they might have thought long and hard before they jumped into bed with white people, because there is a financial revolution. Financial revelation. There's a financial revolution going on that was essentially taking the New Deal construct, which had put a lot of restraints onto banks in the financial industry and limited big businesses so small business can flourish, and had really started building a foundation so smaller and medium-sized businesses could not only grow and prosper, but also allow for their individual communities to also prosper. Well, they were peeling away at that. There were people peeling away at that. And so towards the end of the 60s, you started getting a lot of very greedy people attacking the laws that had really built up the foundation of the financial regulatory infrastructure for the New Deal. And seriously, get Goliath, guys. Get Goliath and absorb that book. It goes very well into all this. If black folks had understood, I mean, we were fighting for equality at a time period where white people were fighting each other over equality, but their equality was drastically different than what we were thinking. We were thinking human equality. White people were thinking human money equality. They were thinking in terms of property. They were thinking in strict terms of property. And I'm specifically talking about the moneyed class now. So throughout the 70s and the 80s, That parallel movement stripping away that New Deal infrastructure was occurring, while they were also at the same time beating us up and locking us up. But we weren't paying attention to what white people were doing, so we were so into what we wanted that we weren't paying attention to the people that we wanted it from. And this was something that Dr. King started talking about. I mean, look, I missed it. I'm not going to act like, oh, I knew this immediately. No, I missed it until recently. Until recently. And I'm afraid we're going to make the same mistake again. I really am. Because there's a lot of changes going on in this society, and black people, we're talking about integration and assimilation again, and we ain't even paying attention to what's going on. We're not. So, for instance, I mentioned pandemic and all of this stuff coming out about COVID-19 being fake. And a lot of you were like, yeah, yep, I believe that. And then I say to you, there's right-wing, conservative, and a lot of these places are freaking white supremacists. Money that's being spent on that message. Does that change your mind about what you just heard? Does it? I mean, it's a good question. The reality is, for some of you, you're not going to change your mind on it. This is just another virus that the white man created that maybe got out of his control. But you're missing the point. You literally have billionaires who are white supremacists who are spending money to fool you. And this pandemic thing, this idea that the COVID-19 isn't real, this isn't the first thing they're spending money on, targeting you and targeting people around you to fool them on. These are the same people that have no problem bankrolling rap stars, athletes that are ignorant as hell to make you think that that's what blackness is. The book that I said I remembered, it's called Invisible Hands. The Businessman's Crusade Against the New Deal. You want to get that book. Yeah, definitely get that book. Trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything else. Give me 1 second, family. All right, family, so I'm back. All right, so where I originally started from, and I got a couple of books that I definitely want to give to you guys, because it is time we got to return back to the physical and really start to understand this thing. It's going to be hard over the next couple of years, but we got to get a hold of this thing. If we don't bring our minds together, and I mean this, we got to bring our minds back together, then Africa's never going to rise. Okay, I don't want to say never, because I think that's what the wealthy are counting on right now. They're trying to pass the Imperial Guard, which came from Europe to America. Now they're trying to pass it off to India or China. And no, Africa has to rise. It's in prophecy. She will rise. Anyway, so because the mother couldn't communicate with her children, the fire raged out of control. And then COVID-19 came. And the idea, apparently, was to have COVID-19 hit, punish a little bit, and go away. That's why Trump kept, he kept saying it because also Kanye's wife tweeted that it would go away. But that was the whole plan, was to have it come up, ravage a little bit, and then go away. But along the way, something happened. And we are still in that something. The reason why COVID-19 is here, think about COVID-19 as your white blood cells. Now, of course, you're like, it's making us sick. It ain't making us better. So what the hell? Yeah, but for the planet, it's kind of making it's making itself better. Why? Well, because all these lockdowns that we've been doing, this less traveling that we've been engaging in, it's put less pollution into the air. And with that less pollution has come what? Clearer skies, cleaner water, cleaner streets, less traffic noise, things like that. That's helping the mother out really, really well. A few months ago, there was a story that made headlines around the world because there was a town in India that for, thousands of years, it was picturesque because behind it, it had the tippy tops, the snow-covered tops of the Himalayas behind it. But because of the fog in the modern era, you couldn't, it was like, it wasn't that far away from the Himalayas, and yet you couldn't even see the tops of the Himalayas anymore because of the fog. Well, it lifted because everything was shut down. The mother is getting healthier. The idea behind the virus was to expose the troubled parts, as it was. It was to expose where the problems were. Who was going to, sacrifice their economy? Sort of. Don't forget, money isn't real. So you could pay as much as you want and go into as much debt as you want because money isn't real. And periodically throughout the history of the world, they've had to do jubilees because the way that the systems have been set up in Europe and Asia, they've always created far too much debt. So sooner or later, they have to say, oh, the hell with this. Start over. That's how unreliable and unstable their systems have been. Anyway, the idea was to find out where the problem spots were. Obviously, we're living in the United States. Mother Nature knows the problem seems to be the United States, but she's waiting. She's going to wait probably another year. It wouldn't surprise me if either next year in the summer or the following year, just before the summer, this thing goes away. Because it's not going to, the vaccine ain't going to be, I'm not saying don't get it, but all it's going to do, it appears, is slow it down. It isn't going to stop it. So, but the whole idea was to show where the problem spots were and to identify them so Mother Earth knows where she has to hit. Now, what does that mean? Where does she have to hit? We're about to find out. Because the weather's about to change drastically. Now, it's not going to change how people think it's going to change. Because there is an effect that most of us don't pay attention to that is about to really, really, really take off. I'm going to talk about that in one moment. So I'm back. All right. What is about to start picking up, we first witnessed back in 2002. And it's kind of weird because I figured that this thing would only have an impact for a year, but it didn't. It had an impact for 3 or 4 years. In fact, it is the ancestors. I remember them telling me this. Before I used to do all this, the ancestors would tell me stuff, and I would just think that it was a thought that I had, and I'd be like, well, that's weird, and that's interesting. Huh. So, back in 2006, I was just starting to get spiritual. I was doing meditations and stuff like that, and the answer to that told me, they were like, you realize Hurricane Katrina was connected to 2001, right? What happened with September 11th? And I'm like, oh, what are you talking about? Let me tell you what they're talking about. Nope, it's not white people with machines controlling the weather. They haven't got to that point yet. They want to, but they ain't gonna get to that point. Mainly because they're not trusted with that technology. Anyway, 2001, everybody knows September 11th happened. You remember what happened immediately after the towers fell? I think it was immediately after the towers fell. It might have been right before. But the federal agency over flight, I think it's the FFA, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, they actually shut down air traffic throughout the country. Completely shut it down for days. Shut it down. Boom. Something very interesting happened during that time period. My brother and I were outside playing catch. He was in high school at the time. I was graduated, but we were playing catch. And, I'd said to him, I go, man, doesn't the sky look bright to you? I said, hasn't it looked brighter these last couple of days? And he's like, I was thinking that. I'm like, yeah, doesn't it look brighter? And it did. It looked very blue. Now, I grew up in the country, so I knew what blue skies look like. I knew what clear skies at night look like. And this was the clearest. I was living in town at the time. This was the bluest I had ever seen it in town. Because, we used to have the planes going across all the time with the, as we call them now, chemtrails dotting behind them. Well, back in the late 90s, there was a scientist who had a theory. He had done some research in Australia and the Pacific Ocean suggesting that the sunlight from the sun, all of the sunlight wasn't reaching the surface of the earth. He had come up with the theory that the chemtrails, basically, or the water trails that had come in the wake of planes, that they were actually causing clouds to form, which you can look up there and see it. It's not hard. And that was actually reflecting sunlight back into space. He had the theory. The question was, how would he ever test it? Because in order to do that, obviously, you would have to have a very densely populated place stop flying. And that just never happened till September 11th. He went to work collecting data on temperatures. And what he found was, in the immediate months after the grounding of those planes, for like, I think it was like 8 or 9 days, the temperature fluctuated widely. It went up drastically. Now, I remember that winter being very odd. It was very warm. It was far warmer than it should have been. And we were dealing with like 50-degree weather in January. Now, I lived in Western New York at that time period. To have 50-degree weather in January was fascinating. It was shocking. It was. And I mean, we had a little bit of a winter, but then it went like right into, almost immediately into a pretty warm trend. he called his theory global dimming. That's what he called his theory, was global dimming. The idea was that those trails were actually blocking out the sunlight or reflecting it back into space. Thus, because the full force of the sun wasn't reaching the planet, it was actually hiding the impact of industrialization. Ladies and gentlemen, flying in the second half of March and throughout April dropped like 85 to 90% in this country. And they weren't sending those planes up just for the heck of it. Those planes remained grounded. Do you understand what I'm telling you? It was like 7 to 9 days, I think, was when they how long they kept planes grounded for September 11th. That had an impact for 4 years. For 4 years. I remember the following winter, 2002 into 2003. It was cold. It was snowy. It was stunning. It was so different than the previous winter. I want to say 2003 into 2004 wasn't as cold and snowy, but I mean, it still had its moments. It still had its moments. This is going to be with us for the next, like, 4 to 10 years. The impact of not flying that much. And this was global. This wasn't just the United States. This was global. But what it did was it gave the mother a chance to breathe and to kind of gather her strength and figure out what she was going to do. Now, we might be in store for another lockdown this coming up winter because of how bad COVID's going to get. We might see a bad flu season along with it, which is going to only heighten it. I mean, by next spring, you could really be looking at 500 to 750,000 people, if not more, dead in the United States from this thing. But we need to keep our eyes on this because weather's going to get a little sporadic. And you want to be ready to do what you got to, to organize your community to take care of itself if you need to for a while. And I mean that. I mean that. Don't be playing about it. This is not a time to be selfish, guys, because, people are getting marked. This is one of them things. People are getting marked. So don't be playing. Do not joke about this. Let me see. There was a book that I had seen that I wanted to make sure I gave to you guys. Democracy Incorporated. Democracy Incorporated. It's a really good book, which always remaining hydrated, but I got it right here. Democracy Incorporated, guys. The ancestors literally were trying to get me to get this book years ago. Sheldon S. Woolen. This is actually this book right here. What makes this book very interesting is it's kind of a culmination of this man's work, and it's actually it's a lot about cultural psychology, and it's actually somewhat metaphysical. Get this book. Don't be playing. Get this book. There's another one. The Cult of Trump. I've mentioned it before. You do want to get that. I gotta check that one still. And Democracy in Chains. Democracy in Chains. I always forget about that one. And the book Dark Money. I haven't the audio version one, but I don't have a hard copy. All right, so on top of that, here's a few more for you guys. Worse Than War. Worse Than War. Daniel Jonas. That's who that Daniel Jonas Goldhagen. Goldhagen. Worse Than War. I bought this book probably, I think 10 years ago. Born to Buy. Born to Buy. Born to Buy. Born to Buy. Very short read, but yeah, it's gonna school you. The Wastemakers. Some of you may have not heard of this. This guy is amazing. Vance Packard. And then the last one, you really need to get this. Culture of Narcissists. This is more about the liberal tendency of narcissism. You got to get this book. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them below. I'm your brother, Valentine and Bobby Hemmitt. Till next time, guys. Peace.